Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Brian always believed that building a solid life required patience, hard work, and mutual trust. At 32, he'd built a respectable career as a financial consultant, owned a comfortable home in a tree-lined neighborhood, and had a family that, at least on the surface, ran like a Swiss watch. Claire, his 30-year-old wife, worked as a nurse in a busy hospital, often pulling shifts that stretched into the early hours of the morning. Their 6-year-old daughter, Emma, was a cheerful, chatty child full of stories about school, her favorite cartoons, and weekend park outings with her mom. To Brian, that routine meant stability. He never imagined that hidden beneath the surface of that normalcy, a meticulously orchestrated betrayal was quietly eroding everything he considered sacred. The first crack in that perfect facade appeared on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Brian had left the office early to pick up Emma from school, since Claire was on shift. On the drive home, the little girl swung her legs in the back seat, humming a song she'd learned in music class. Suddenly, mid-sentence about her classmates, she said with the innocence of someone who doesn't grasp the weight of her words, "Daddy, Mommy has a friend we sometimes meet at the park. He's nice and talks to us. Mommy said she'd tell you about him later." Brian felt something strange tighten in his chest, but he forced a smile in the rearview mirror. "Oh really? That's interesting, sweetie. What's this friend like?" Emma just shrugged, uninterested. "I don't know. He's tall and wears glasses. Mommy seems to like talking to him." Brian didn't ask any more questions, but those words echoed in his mind for the rest of the day like a distant alarm that wouldn't stop ringing. That night, when Claire came home after her shift, Brian watched her with renewed attention. She looked tired, as always, but there was something different in the way she avoided his eyes and kept checking her phone even during dinner. He wanted to ask about the park friend, but something held him back. Maybe it was fear of seeming paranoid. Maybe it was the instinct that asking would open a door he could never close again. So Brian decided to act differently. Over the next few days, he began noticing details he'd previously overlooked. Claire started going for walks in the park on her days off with a frequency he didn't recall noticing before. She always came back with Emma, both seemingly relaxed, but there was something overly rehearsed about those outings. Brian checked the GPS history of the car Claire used and found records of extended stops at the same municipal park, always at the same times, always on Thursday mornings. Suspicion turned into certainty when Brian, pretending a meeting had been cancelled, discreetly followed Claire and Emma one of those mornings. He parked at a safe distance and walked to a wooded area of the park where he could observe without being seen. What he saw confirmed his suspicions, though not as dramatically as he'd imagined. Claire sat on a bench next to a tall man with glasses, exactly as Emma had described. They chatted while Emma played nearby in the playground. The interaction seemed friendly, but something in Claire's body language revealed this wasn't just casual friendship. Still, with the child present, everything remained discreet. Brian took covert photos with his phone but knew he needed more than that. He needed to understand what happened when Emma wasn't around. Back in the car, Brian took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. He wouldn't be the betrayed husband who acts on impulse and later regrets it. He'd be strategic. That same afternoon, he hired a private investigator with excellent references, a discreet man named Harris who promised results within 48 hours. Brian gave him every detail: times, locations, the man's description, the license plate of the car parked near the park. Harris got straight to the point: "Leave it to me. You'll get everything documented, with date and time. If there's anything beyond the park, I'll find it." Brian paid up front and returned home, where Claire greeted him with a quick kiss on the cheek before disappearing into the bedroom to change. He looked at her and realized he no longer felt that tightness in his chest. Now there was only a cold, almost mechanical determination to uncover the whole truth. 48 hours later, Harris sent a complete report via encrypted email. Brian opened the files alone in his home office, locking the door behind him. The photos were damning. Claire and the man didn't just meet at the park. There were records of lunches at discreet restaurants, private meetings during times when Emma was at school, moments captured that clearly revealed the nature of their relationship. The report also included the man's full name, Owen Pritchard, 41-year-old orthopedic surgeon, married, father of 3. Harris had even included Owen's home address and photos of his wife, a woman named Diane who appeared to be around 40 and was always photographed with her children on public social media. Brian read every line of the report twice, absorbing information like a lawyer building a case. Owen worked at the same hospital as Claire. They'd known each other for at least 2 years. And according to conversations captured with a directional microphone during one of their meetings, Owen had promised Claire he'd divorce Diane once the right time came, a classic lie that Claire apparently believed. Brian spent the next 3 days planning every move with the precision of a chess player. He didn't just want to confront Claire. He wanted her and Owen to face the consequences of their choices, publicly and irreversibly. The idea came to him while reviewing Diane's photos on social media. She seemed like a devoted mother, always posting about her kids' school events, family dinners, birthday celebrations. Diane deserved to know the truth just as much as Brian did, maybe even more, considering Owen had been deceiving her for years while building a parallel life with Claire. Brian created an anonymous social media profile and sent Diane a direct message: "We need to talk about something important involving your husband. I know this sounds strange, but I have proof of something you need to see. Can we meet somewhere public?" Diane replied in less than an hour, suspicious but curious. Brian suggested a neutral cafe, far from the hospital and both their neighborhoods. The meeting took place on a cold Saturday morning. Diane arrived right on time, a tired-looking but elegant woman whose eyes already seemed prepared for bad news. Brian introduced himself calmly, explaining who he was and why he was there. Then, methodically, he showed her the photos, the reports, the meeting logs, the recorded conversations. Diane didn't cry. She just turned pale, her hands trembling slightly as she held Brian's phone and scrolled through the images. When she finished, she handed the phone back and said in a controlled voice, "I suspected. Too many extra shifts, meetings that never ended, deleted messages. But I had 3 kids to care for and a life to keep running. It was easier to ignore than to destroy everything." Brian shook his head. "You're not destroying anything. He already did that. I'm just giving you the chance to act with the right information." Diane took a deep breath and asked, "What do you plan to do?" Brian laid out his plan. Diane listened to the end and, to his surprise, agreed without hesitation. They deserve this. Both of them. The confrontation was set for the following Thursday in a secluded area of the hospital parking lot, right after Claire's shift. Diane arranged for a close friend to watch her 3 children that afternoon, shielding them from what was about to happen. Brian and Diane coordinated everything through messages. She'd arrive first and park in a remote spot, away from the main entrance. Brian would park near Claire's car. At 5 p.m., when both Owen and Claire left the hospital, they'd be in a discreet location, no audience, just the 4 of them. Brian didn't sleep well the night before, not from nerves, but from an almost obsessive anticipation of what was coming. He'd mentally rehearsed every word, every possible reaction, every excuse Claire or Owen might try to use. When Thursday arrived, Brian left home early, kissed Emma on the forehead as she ate breakfast, and told Claire he had meetings all day. She barely looked up from her phone. At 4:50 p.m., Brian was already in the parking lot, watching the hospital entrance from inside his car. Diane arrived minutes later, parking in a distant spot away from the main flow of traffic. At 5:10, Owen exited through the hospital's side door, walking toward his car with the relaxed posture of someone expecting no trouble. He stopped when he saw Diane leaning against her vehicle, arms crossed, in a quiet corner few employees ever passed through. "What are you doing here?" Owen asked, his voice tense. Diane didn't answer. She just pointed to the side, where Claire had just stepped out of the hospital and froze at the sight of Brian standing beside her car. Claire's expression changed instantly, her face draining of color as she looked from Brian to Owen to Diane. Owen tried to take a step toward his car, but Diane blocked his path. "No. You're staying right here and listening." Brian walked over to Claire, keeping his voice low but firm. "How long has it been, Claire?" She tried to speak, but the words failed. He didn't give her time to recover. "Let me help." 6 months? A year? Or maybe since you started working with Dr. Owen Pritchard over there? He gestured toward Owen, who was now pale, glancing around to see if coworkers were watching. Diane stepped forward. 2 years, Brian. I found old messages on his laptop last night after you showed me those photos. 2 years of lies, 2 families destroyed while they played house. Claire finally found her voice, shaky and desperate. "Brian, I can explain. Owen said he'd get divorced, that we'd," Brian cut her off with a bitter laugh. "We'd what? Build a life together? He told you that while going home every night to his wife and 3 kids. Did you really believe that?" Owen tried to intervene, his voice low but strained. "Look, this is between the 4 of us. Let's handle it like adults." Diane turned to him with a contained fury that even impressed Brian. "Adult? You think betrayal is an adult way to handle problems? You lied to this woman, promising a future you never intended to give, and still think you get to dictate how this ends?" She opened her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. "These are the divorce papers. My lawyer will officially serve you tomorrow, but I wanted you to know now." "And about the hospital?" She kept her voice steady. "I've already contacted Human Resources. They're launching an investigation into your professional conduct. Consequences will follow internal policy." Claire was crying now, her hands covering her face. "Brian, please, think of Emma. She needs a family." Anger flared in Brian, but he kept his voice controlled. "You should have thought of her before making the choices you did. Emma deserved parents who respected the commitment they made to each other. What kind of example do you think this is for her?" Claire reached for his arm, but Brian stepped back. "No. You don't have that right anymore. I've already spoken to my lawyer. You'll get the papers by the end of the week. I'm seeking primary custody of Emma, and with the evidence I have about everything that's happened, including the impact on our family, I'll get it." Owen made one last attempt, addressing Diane with false diplomacy. "Diane, we can talk at home, settle this civilly." Diane cut him off. "Civilly? Like you inventing shifts that didn't exist? Like using our kids' names to justify overtime while you were with her?" She pointed at Claire. "No. It's over. You can pick up your things tomorrow. I've locked the bedroom and changed all the passwords. And our kids? They'll learn the truth when they're old enough to understand their father chose to destroy the family." Owen fell silent, defeated, staring at the ground. Brian turned to Claire one last time. "I loved you. I built an entire life believing we were in this together. But you chose to believe the lies of a married man and destroy everything we spent years building. So no, Claire. There's no explanation that justifies this. No excuse that erases what you've done." He got into his car, started the engine, and drove out of the parking lot without looking back. In the rearview mirror, he saw Claire collapse against her car, shoulders shaking with sobs, while Owen stood frozen and Diane got into her own vehicle. The confrontation had been quiet, but devastating. No audience, no public scandal. Just raw, inescapable truth placed squarely before those who tried to hide it. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal paperwork and emotional adjustments. Brian hired one of the region's top divorce attorneys, a pragmatic man named Stewart who listened to the whole story and simply said, "With the evidence you have, she doesn't stand a chance at getting primary custody. At most, supervised visits until she proves she can provide a stable environment for the child. That's exactly what Brian requested. He didn't want to cut Emma off from her mother, but he also wouldn't trust Claire with major decisions about their daughter after what had happened. The divorce moved quickly. Claire didn't contest most terms, likely out of shame or exhaustion. She moved into a small apartment on the other side of town, far from the hospital, after the work environment became uncomfortable. Owen faced consequences both personally and professionally. Diane had meticulously documented everything, including messages and evidence proving misconduct. The hospital launched an internal investigation into violations of professional conduct policies. Administrative consequences were applied according to the institution's internal protocols. Additionally, Diane's divorce proceedings were strict. She requested child support for all 3 kids and a fair division of marital assets, including their family home. Owen had to make significant life adjustments, facing the financial and emotional fallout of his choices. His workplace became difficult, and he had to deal with the loss of both professional and personal credibility. Claire tried to stay in touch with him during the first few weeks after the confrontation, but Owen blocked her. Without Brian, without Owen, with limited visitation rights and a new job elsewhere, Claire's life changed completely within months. Brian focused all his energy on Emma. The girl, initially confused by the separation, began adapting with the help of a child therapist Brian hired. He explained, in simple terms a 6-year-old could understand, that sometimes adults make mistakes, and that didn't mean mommy didn't love her, only that mommy and daddy couldn't live together anymore. Emma accepted it with the natural resilience of children, especially since Brian worked hard to keep her routine stable. He adjusted his work schedule to always be available when she needed him, attended every school event, and made sure she knew she was unconditionally loved. On weekends when Emma visited Claire, Brian used the time to reorganize his own life, reconnecting with friends he'd neglected during the marriage. 9 months after the hospital parking lot confrontation, Brian was sitting at a cafe when he saw Claire walk in. She looked visibly different, her hair shorter, her eyes filled with a deep sadness that hadn't been there before, her posture bent as if carrying an invisible weight. She saw him, hesitated, then approached. "Hi, Brian." He nodded, expression neutral. "Claire." She asked if she could sit for a minute, and he agreed. Their conversation was brief and superficial. Claire mentioned she was looking for a job in another city, trying to start over far from old memories. She asked about Emma, and Brian replied that their daughter was doing well, adjusted, happy at school. Claire bit her lip and whispered, "I ruined everything, didn't I?" Brian didn't answer right away. Then, calmly but firmly, he said, "Yes. You did. But Emma still needs a mother, so I hope you can rebuild yourself, for her." Claire nodded, eyes filling with tears, and stood to leave. "Thank you for not destroying me completely." Brian watched her walk out of the cafe and thought about the irony of those words. He hadn't destroyed Claire. She'd done that herself. Brian never regretted how he'd handled things. In the months that followed, he focused on building a new routine, a new version of himself that didn't rely on external validation or blind trust. He started going to the gym, picked up old hobbies like photography and cooking, and spent more quality time with Emma, creating memories to replace the old ones. The pain of betrayal never fully disappeared, but it became manageable, a scar that reminded him of the lesson learned without dictating his choices anymore. He realized that revenge, when carried out with intelligence and fairness, didn't necessarily bring lasting satisfaction, but it did offer something perhaps more valuable: closure. On a Sunday afternoon, nearly a year after the confrontation, Brian was at the park with Emma. She ran through the playground, laughing with other kids, completely immersed in childhood innocence. Brian watched from a bench, the same bench where he'd once seen Claire and Owen months earlier. The irony didn't escape him. But now, sitting there with his daughter playing just meters away, he felt no anger or bitterness. Only peace. A peace built on truth, justice, and the decision not to let someone else's choices define his future. Emma ran over, asking if they could get ice cream. Brian smiled, took her small hand, and walked toward the car. The past stayed behind, exactly where it belonged. And the future, for the first time in a long while, looked like a blank page full of possibilities. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.